Welcome back, everybody, to another epic rap battles of history reaction video. We're going to be looking at two more videos today. The first one, kind of historical, kind of not, but it's something I know a little bit about, so I wanted to do Jack the Ripper versus Hannibal Lecter. And then we're going to take a look at Che Guevara versus Guy Fawkes, which is a lot more historical. So let's dive right into this first one, and I'm going to try not to interrupt in the middle of a line. I'll try to get to an end of the line and then try to react, but don't forget to hit that like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for getting us to 10,000 subscribers. Now we're on the fast track to 20,000, so I hope you'll help get us there.
Jack the Ripper versus Hannibal Lecter!
Oi, mate, pass the liquor. It's Jack the Ripper, Jack the Rapper. Following you way before the dawn of Twitter. I'm a human trigger warning through the night until the morning. When the light shines upon my crimes, you find it sick, appalling. An infamous, notorious delinquent. There's little more gory a thing than living in Victorian England. This is horrorcore. Beware if you're a common whore, or at late night you may find me knocking on your door.
All right, so there's a lot there right off the bat. This is Victorian England. The Jack the Ripper killings, as they were called, take place in 1888, in the fall of 1888. There's a lot of debate over how many victims there were, but there are typically 5 that they call the canonical victims, the ones that everybody agrees were definitely killed by Jack the Ripper. There may have been a few others before and after that also happened, but Whitechapel, which is the part of London where this takes place, is notoriously poor. It's notoriously an area with a lot of immigrants. It's people living in very poor conditions, packed in like sardines. It's an area that there's a lot of this type of crime that goes on. Whitechapel is the area right around. It's very close to where the Tower of London is, on the east side of London. It's just outside of the actual city of London, as it was known. In fact, one of the murders actually takes place in the city of London limits. But the 5 canonical victims are Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. They're all prostitutes. 4 of the 5, the first 4 were all kind of like right around age 40. And then the last one, Mary Jane Kelly's much younger. She's the only one that's killed indoors. If you don't scare easily or you can handle it, most of the victims, there are photos of them, but I warn you, the ones of Mary Jane Kelly are absolutely horrendous to look at, because unlike the others where he had a real short time, because they were killed outdoors, the first 4, and all of them were killed in areas where there were police that patrolled. And so there's like a window of 10, 12, 15 minutes at most that he had to kill these women, do the mutilations that he did, and then take off. Mary Jane Kelly was indoors. He had a lot more time, and that was evident in how he killed her. But he talks a lot. He talks about the dawn of Twitter. And part of what made Jack the Ripper notorious, it wasn't that he killed, he only killed probably 5 people. In the realm of serial killers, that's really pretty minor. I'm not trying to downplay what he did. It was horrible. But serial killers, we've had them kill dozens and sometimes even more. Jack the Ripper was famous because he was the first kind of celebrity serial killer, so to speak. Somebody in the newspapers came up with the name Jack the Ripper. They wrote a letter that they signed and claimed it was from Jack the Ripper, but it was probably a newspaper person trying to drum up headlines, signed it Jack the Ripper, and it kind of became his trade name. There were all these letters that came in. One may have been genuine, but let me. I'm getting too far ahead of myself.
Not keen to leave until I'm knee deep in blood and gore. Your grieving family on their knees, we've been scrubbing floors. If the police need a lead, they know what they're looking for. My raps are like the way I eat my meat, bloody raw.
So the police need a lead. They never caught Jack the Ripper. Early on, there was this idea that he was somebody called Leather Apron, and it turns out, I think now we're starting to think that maybe there was this Polish immigrant named Kosminski who may very well have been Jack the Ripper. He's probably the most likely of the suspects, and they knew at the time who he was. Of course, Jack the Ripper, after the Mary Jane Kelly murder, it stops. And if you know anything about serial killers, they don't typically stop. So he either got arrested or died or left the country. There's a lot of theories about who he was. I wrote a paper in high school about my theory on who I thought he was, because there was this diary that was found at the time, things like that. But they never did catch him for sure. There's a lot of movies that have been made about that. But let's see what Hannibal Lecter has to say.
You're a classic megalomania. You haven't met mentioned me once in your entire battle rap. Pity your verse wasn't worth the trip in the jacket. Quit jacking off in the track and put the lotion in the...
All right, so one of the most famous lines from the movie Silence of the Lambs is when you have the serial killer Buffalo Bill telling the girl who's down in the well, he says, it rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again, because he's preparing these women to be turned into clothing, which was something that I think is probably inspired by a serial killer named Ed Gein, who is the one who inspired the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, who would make lampshades and clothing and different things like that out of people that he started digging them up first. And then he eventually started actually killing people so he could get it that way. And of course, that's another homage to one of the famous lines from Silence of the Lambs, where he talks about a census taker tried to test me once. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, and then he does that thing which he's doing here, that thing. One of the few movies in history, by the way, that won Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, and Best Picture, all at the Oscars.
Thought of your putrid flesh makes me want to shiver, 'cause your British body's covered in more piss than kitty litter. You stabbed women when they wouldn't give you attention, like a Penny Dreadful version of O.J. Simpson. But these days your nickname is all that's even known, and you didn't even come up with that shit on your own.
And that's true. And the forensic reports tell us that Jack the Ripper actually probably strangled the victims first, because there was very little in terms of like arterial spray, which is probably how he got away with being able to walk away from the scene without being seen, because he probably didn't get a lot of blood on himself. He actually strangled them and then slit their throats, disemboweled them. In a couple of cases, took some body parts. Kidney was taken, I think, from Catherine Eddowes, which may have been then mailed to the police. That's probably one of the few letters that may have been real, was the one that was, it was actually very poorly written. It was obviously somebody who probably didn't speak English as their first language, which is what even leads more to the possibility it was an immigrant like Kosminski. But it was, that one was signed, it wasn't signed Jack the Ripper, it was signed Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk. There was something called the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, which, because the police hadn't been able to catch the guy, there were these civilians who put together a committee that was going to go out and patrol and try to catch him. And this kidney and this letter were sent to Mr. Lusk, who was the head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee.
Real. You'll find me making vacancies in brothels, while you only exist inside the pages of a novel. You were kept for ages in the hovel, contained within a cage behind a locked door. Well, I never got caught. So who's the superior serial killer, Dr. Lecter? I'm still wanted. You're forgotten. People these days are watching Dexter, so God protect you from the hell I've spread upon us. I'm terrorizing London. Fuck the 7-7 bombers. No, Jack, you are doing fine before your ham-fisted attempt at a terrorist line. How typical of Jack the Ripper to chase a headline. Pick Ray Liotta's brain. Ask him how I get mine.
So pick Ray Liotta's brain. There's a scene in the sequel movie to Silence of the Lambs where Ray Liotta is one of the guys that's after Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper actually, or not Jack the Ripper, Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter actually drugs him, cuts off the top of his head to reveal his brain, and then takes a piece of his brain and fries it and feeds it to him. It's pretty horrifying, but that's what that refers to.
Don't get me wrong, I'd roast both your balls and my hibachi. But for a serial killer, you're as tasteless as a bowl of kashi. You prey on a prostitute and play with her body. I don't mind that you're naughty, Jack. I hate that you're sloppy. Barney, take me back to solitary confinement, because this dirty little lamb has just been silenced.
All right, so I got to give it to Jack the Ripper just because he actually existed rather than Hannibal Lecter, though both of them had some really good lines. But Jack the Ripper's fascinating. Always fascinated me. I think has fascinated a lot of people over time just because he never got caught. There was one night that was called the double event, which is when he killed two victims about 45 minutes apart. And what happened was the first one, he actually got interrupted while he was in the middle of killing her. Somebody actually spotted him. And so he didn't really get a chance to mutilate her body. And so then he found another one later that night. That was Catherine Eddowes and Elizabeth Stride that night. But yeah, we don't know for sure who it was. If I had to put money on it, I would say Kosminski, but I think there's also an argument to be made for James Maybrick. They found this diary back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's been called the Jack the Ripper diary. Initially, they said it was discredited, and they even got the person who said they found it to claim it was forged. But what they've decided since then, based on all the evidence, is if it was forged in the 1880s. It's contemporary to Jack the Ripper. Whether it's real or not is another story. Whether it was written by James Maybrick is another story. But that's a really interesting story in and of itself. James Maybrick died not too long after the last murder, the Mary Jane Kelly murder. He died, I think, in the spring of 1889. His wife, who was an American, Florence Maybrick, was actually arrested and convicted of his murder, even though she really didn't kill him. They found arsenic in his system and said that she had poisoned him. She had been cheating on him. He was much older than she was. And this diary that they found in James Maybrick's house was purportedly written by him, and it was him confessing to being Jack the Ripper. And he claimed that it was his way of getting back at whores like his wife, because his wife was a whore for cheating on him. And it gave all these clues that kind of looked like it could prove that it was him. And as it turned out, what happened to James Maybrick was he had been taking arsenic. Arsenic in very small doses could be used kind of like LSD. It was a drug that could get you. It was like a hallucinogenic drug. But the power of that drug was so strong on your body that you died from the withdrawal. So once you started taking arsenic, you always had to do it. And he eventually got off the arsenic. I think he couldn't get a supply of it anymore, and he died from the withdrawal. And his wife was convicted of his murder because of the arsenic being found in the system. Eventually, that was tossed out after she had done a lot of time in prison. But I would say 80% likely it's Kosminski, about 20% it could be James Maybrick. I think there's a lot of things that point to James Maybrick as being psychologically the right kind of person. He was a cotton merchant who was in London on the weekends, which is when all the murders happened on the weekends. Because he had an American wife, some of the letters that might have been from him had some Americanisms in them. So there's a lot of things that make it possible that he was a suspect. But just an interesting thing to talk about. When I go to London, I'm planning on taking one of the Jack the Ripper tours. I think it'll be a lot of fun to go to those sites and see that. But let me know who you think won. Use the comment section below. But let's dive into one more. All right, for our other one, we're going to look at a couple of revolutionaries. This is Guy Fawkes and Che Guevara. Guy Fawkes was part of the remember the 5th of November. It was the 5th of November plot to blow up Parliament, kill not only Parliament, but King James I. I think it was in the like 1605 or something, right around the early 1600s. And he was Catholic, fighting against the Protestant government. And then, of course, Che Guevara is the right-hand man to Fidel Castro, who helped with the overthrow of the government and setting up the communist regime in Cuba, was later killed, helping lead a revolt in Bolivia.
Give out of the terror, fresh kangaroo era. Ill rhyme slayer from the 60s era. Revolting, heavy metal rebel blood spiller. Me and my gorillas are a squad of killers. Known worldwide for my steely-eyed look. You're famous cause of Alan Moore's third best book. And all the children say we will be like Che. Asthmatic, but I'll take your breath away. Try to rebel against James the First. Here's a tip for your next plot. Try to rehearse. I got my face on a magnet on your roommate's fridge. Your head is on a spike up on London Bridge. You had one job, cabron, to strike a matchstick. Got caught with the fuse like your boss. Not lit. You should have stayed anonymous, epic fail guy. Treat this battle like the gallows and take another dive.
Okay, so most of what Guevara is referring to there are things with Guy Fawkes. So let's talk a little bit about that. Che Guevara is actually Argentinian. I think he was like a medical school student. And in the midst of his travels, he saw a lot of poor people and a lot of things that he just didn't like about how people were living. So he kind of became enraptured by the ideas of communism and became very revolutionary with that. He ends up, I think, meeting Fidel Castro and his brother Raul in Mexico City. And then they go to Cuba and overthrow the government. And he kind of rises up to become Castro's right-hand man. But he was always kind of very revolutionary. And so once they had a stable government, and he had a position within the Cuban government, he then decides to get involved with other revolutions. He goes to Africa for a while, then he goes to Bolivia, and that was where he was captured and executed. But he refers also to Guy Fawkes' execution, talks about him being hanged. Guy Fawkes was actually hanged, drawn, and quartered. And I think there's some references later to some of that. But he also refers to your job was just to strike a match. There were multiple people involved in this plot. And there's a good movie with Kit Harington who plays Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, who Kit Harington's kind of the star, and they talk about that 5th of November plot. Guy Fawkes is the guy that gets caught because he's down under Parliament in the basement with all the explosives, waiting for the time when it's supposed to be exploded, and he gets caught ahead of time, and he's tortured for a long period of time, and eventually he signs a confession and things like that. But let's see what else he has to say.
As a communist, it must really hurt that your face has been cheapened, weakened, besmirched, being plastered on posters, coasters, and shirts, making capitalists rich off of you on Merc.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You know, you see a lot of things that say Che on them. It has turned in kind of to a capitalist thing. People are making money in a capitalist system off of a guy who hated capitalism and wanted to throw it out in favor of communism.
I'm a pious man and I fight for the Lord. I would cut you, but I don't want your sweat on my sword. I was tortured until I could hardly sign my name, and listening to you felt pretty much the same. If
you look at Guy Fawkes' signature, and I think sometimes he referred to himself as Guido Fawkes or Guido Fawkes, you can see just he's been tortured so bad. You can see his signature is just really just, you know, he's barely able to hold the pen to write his name. That's how badly he was tortured. And of course he was Catholic, so that's what he talks about being pious.
Face it, Ernesto, you're Castro Alesso. He's Cuba commander, you're more of the Destro. Revolt all you want, I don't give two Guy Fawkes. But look at Venezuela, what you're fighting for sucks.
Sucks. Guy, you died for the Catholics. A group with a bad touching little boys habit. And this porn star pilgrim look. What's up with that? It's more like me, but very bad at. Oh, what's the Fox say now? When they cut your junk out, I'm the hardest.
All right, so he talks about him cutting his junk out. People don't talk about this part very often, but part of hanging, drawing, and quartering. First, they would hang you until you were like almost ready to pass out, but not quite, and then they'd let you down. They would kind of tie you up, like up on a ladder or something. They would cut off your private parts, throw them in a fire. Then they would cut you open, take out your entrails, throw them in the fire, and only then they would behead you, and then they would cut off your arms and legs and send them to, you know, different places. There's actually a scene, if you ever see the movie starring Chris Pine about, I forget what it's called, but it's on Netflix, about Robert the Bruce. They actually have the scene where he walks out and they have William Wallace's leg nailed up in the center of town.
This never graced a banknote. You're an error-prone terrorist, penny for the scapegoat.
Don't try to boast about your banknotes with Guido. You muddled your economy like mint in a mojito. This very battle disproves your communist initiative. These rhyme skills are not evenly distributed. I've got mass when I'm rapping. You're an upchain, that's Bay of Pigs Latin.
So Bay of Pigs is the attempt, assisted by the CIA, to actually send in Cubans who would actually overthrow the communist government in Cuba. Of course, it didn't work. And of course, the CIA actually also helped the Bolivians who eventually captured Che Guevara and executed him.
It's happened, you should retire. Is it the 5th of November? 'Cause I'm on fire!
Oh, that one's tough. Oh, man. I don't really know who I feel won that one. I kind of lean toward Che Guevara. Just because I feel like he had a lot more historical content in his part. He covered more of history about both sides, I think. So I'd probably give that one to Che, but I don't know. But let me know your thoughts, who you think won each of those. Use the comment section below. Make sure you check out my other epic rap battle videos, which I've done in the past, and check out all the other content on the channel. There's a lot there. I'm going to be heading to Fredericksburg, Virginia at the end of this week, if weather holds up. Hopefully get to the Fredericksburg battlefield, maybe even get to a little of the other battlefields in the area, Chancellorsville, Wilderness, Spotsylvania. So if there's something specific you'd like to see from one of those battlefields, let me know that as well. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.